a snare. Shall it come on all them that dwell on the face of the whole earth, a snare. Watch ye therefore, and pray always, that ye may be accounted worthy to escape all these things that shall come to pass, and to stand before the Son of Man.
Shalom again from the Special Lodge here in Miami, Florida. And I welcome you to part 2 of an autobiography that I did write, that I started way back in 1995. The title is, of course, you see in back of me, Black Sunshine. That's an autobiography I wrote of myself, which is the terrestrial side of my life, this lifetime. You have been hearing or even viewing on YouTube and also on Facebook, social medias, my spiritual and celestial side of whom you only know as Mika in the Bible. So I decided one day lately that you should now see and know of the terrestrial side of my soul. How I had to live on this planet for the past going on 72 years, 72 years, incognito as a regular citizen of this planet, and especially that of the United States of America. And so much until I even took on a law enforcement position with this, actually started with a city government, and then a county government, a state government, and also a federal government I've had a position with at one time that we'll get to later. But again, this is part 2, and it's probably the final part that I'm going to share from my novel that I wrote. That's titled Black Sunshine. I'm going to be reading from the book itself. And as I mentioned in part 1, this is a book that I wrote back in the mid-90s, 1995, that I mailed a copy to Oprah Winfrey. And I did receive a reply back weeks later that they couldn't help me with this book. And I believe, I'm not certain, that I sent a copy to Spike Lee, and I hadn't heard from his office or Spike Lee. But this is merely a movie more than a book, a story. It goes back to what I said in part 1, that they made a movie that used a European actor, white in skin complexion, of course, that played the role of the name Jesus that you're familiar with. Of course, Yahshua in Hebrew. They used a white actor, and they made a movie that was titled, and I quote, "The greatest story ever told," end quote. Not so. And then again, it's true. That means if you researched the word story, it's also synonymous for lying, a lie. You know, when you was a child, most of you was a child were watching, or you was a kid, either one of the two, you was either a kid or a child coming up. You know, playing in the playgrounds, and you were playing with your young buddies, your young friends, and one of them would tell a lie. Some of you run tell your mama, run tell your daddy that they were doing something. They said, "No, you telling a story. You did that. You telling a story. I didn't do that." Well, I'm telling a story that someone lied. And this is the greatest story ever told. This story, if you watch our YouTube channel and look at one of the latest downloads, you'll see that one of the angels of this lodge, known as Jude or Jude, same Jude, lost soul of the Bible, Jude. He broke it down for you in part 3 of that 3-part series. You'll see it.
Now, with that said, before we go into the 2 distinct sides of the story that's generalized in a specific term, we're going to first have to define the word story. According to the dictionaries, the word story means an account of connected events, either real or fictional, designed to either entertain, inform, or instruct. Okay, that's what a story means. One other definition is a story is a narrative account of real or imagined events, typically follows a protagonist pursuing a goal, highlighting the conflicts, resolutions, and internal changes they experience along the way.
And he broke it down for you in part 3 of what a story is. His story and mystery is what that entails. And I am telling you that the greatest story ever told that came out, I believe, in the 1960s by Hollywood is indeed a story. It's a lie. But this is my story. I said it to say, I'm only going to share a couple of chapters out of this book. And I say, I'm going to be reading the book. This is the book, Black Sunshine. And I'm going to be sharing with you only 2 chapters I mentioned. And this is only part 2 of the only 2 parts I'm going to share on YouTube. If you want to hear the rest of it, you'll have to come here to me in Miami, Florida, where I am, where I'm sitting, and where I'm standing. And I believe it was time for me to do this because remember, I said that this vessel that I'm in now goes on 72 years. So going back now, I believe I covered it. Again, I greet you with welcome. I am Shalom. You know, if you study those theologians of the world and you who go to church, if you study your Bible and you know anything of Christ as his return, you'll know that he must fulfill what's promised in Genesis chapter 49 and verse 10, the last days. You may say Genesis, but I say Genesis because there is no J in Hebrew. But the Christ must fulfill the promise of verse 10 of that chapter 49 of Genesis, which means he must come back as Shalom, the lawgiver, as Shalom. It also means that Shalom would have to be a law enforcement official or a law enforcement person, a law enforcement man, a lawman. And just to recap a little bit in synopsis point of view, I grew up as a lawman. In fact, when I was about 4 years old, growing up on Northwest 10th Avenue near Pork and Bean, and they call Pork and Bean here in Miami, Liberty City area, Pork and Bean on Northwest 10th Avenue and 70th Street. At 4 years old, the woman whose womb I came out of that you call a mother, every Christmas she'd buy me a cap, a hot cowboy cap, a hat if you prefer, and 2 holster gun with 2 guns, a cap guns, and boots, and a badge, a sheriff badge, made of plastic, of course. So every December 25th, I became a sheriff of Dade County in Miami, right here, from age 4. That stopped around age, I guess, 6 or so, when she realized that I was no longer a sheriff, that I was going to be the lawgiver, give it to the sheriff. In high school, well, actually elementary school, in the first grade through fifth grade, I was like a classroom monitor for the teachers. You know, whenever the teacher would go out to the office and leave the kids or the students in the room, children, she appointed me as the snitch, if you want to use that term. So I became a 6-year-old snitch, sometime a 7-year-old snitch, and an 8-year-old snitch after I changed schools, an 8-year-old snitch. I was always singled out like that. Don't know why. I was always singled out like that. And finally, in the 4th grade, in middle school, right here in Miami, Florida, I became what you call a patrol boy. And at that time, we wore straps across our chests and a little belt to go around, and we had a little badge that said patrol boy. And that followed me to the 5th grade as a patrol boy. In fact, the name of the school, I don't mind sharing with you, the name of the school at the time was Alapata Elementary School. And I went to that school. The first school was Holmes Elementary School, still there. But Alapata is no longer there by name. The buildings are still there, but not by name. Then it was Alapata from 3rd grade to the 5th grade, Alapata Elementary. Again, in 4th grade, I became a patrol boy. Never forget running down students who were jaywalking, taking them back to the captain because they were jaywalking. It was like a small 11-year-old cop. Then in middle school or junior high school, I guess you would say, I totally left the law for a moment and went to music. Started playing the drums, started beating on the drums in middle school. In high school, I left patrol, I left music, and went to football. I'm only going back over the book a little. These are some parts that you will not hear in these 2-part testimonies. This is going back now to parts, chapters 1 through about 10, 11. Through high school, played football, and came out of high school. And immediately after high school, I started venturing into law enforcement. Just to recap for a moment, I went to the city of Miami. I became the first public service aide hired to go through the police academy as a public service aide. In April of 1974, we started the academy on April 15th, 1974. I became the first public service aide, City of Miami Police Department in the state of Florida. Hired, of course. We all graduated together, though. We did graduate. There was a class of us. I believe around 32 or so that graduated. Among those 32, I think there was 1, 2, that I can recall, 3 of those later on in life became police officers. Nick became police officers. But more than that became police officers, but what I meant to say is police chiefs. They became police chiefs. That included the first African-American female police chief for North Miami Police Department. And I'm not going to call her name, but you can look it up. I'll probably show her picture on the screen as you look. She became the first. She was one of those in the first class of public service in the city of Miami. As well as another one who became the police chief of Miami Police Department, who was in that first class. I'll put his picture up too. I won't call his name, but I'll put his picture up. He was in that class, along with numerous detectives and other police officers. They make high ranks, they made. City of Miami Police Department. But I left to pursue my career after Miami to the city of Opelika, as I was given an opportunity to join a career on a new careers program in Miami-Dade County. So I left City of Miami to join Opelika Police Department. That's where we are now. At the end of part 1, we concluded that I had graduated out of the graduation ceremony, and now I was ready for the road as a rookie. So I'm going to pick up from where we left off at in part 1. This is part 2. And this would be chapter 20. Chapter 20 of, again, Black Sunshine.
a time tunnel.
So after graduation starts, I'm on page 212. I'm going to be quoting. I'm going to be quoting verbatim. On top of page 212, it says, I quote, still, S-T-I-L-L, still, I had to keep in mind that these guys probably didn't know what a police academy was, much less ever graduating from one. Well, it's still July 1976. I was now 21 years old, soon to be 22, a rookie, out of the police academy and professional witness of a bunch of hillbillies rounding up whiskey bottles for target practice. Now, that's maybe a little inside joke that you may not have heard during our private session of reading, but there were these two guys in Opalaka. They were best buddies. They were hillbillies. And during the afternoon shift, and I'm snitching, I'm not going to call it name, but I'm snitching. During the afternoon shift, going to night, like the 311 shift, they would find an exclusive area, like out in the woods in Opalaka. It was nothing but like a lot of woods around Opalaka swamps. And they would collect bottles from around the local drunks, the town drunks, leave them on the side of the road. They would collect whiskey bottles and wine bottles and take them in the woods and use them for target practice. Start shooting at the bottles. So that'll bring you up to date on what I meant by that. I'll repeat that. I was now 21 years old, soon to be 22, a rookie out of the police academy and professional witness of a bunch of hillbillies rounding up whiskey bottles for target practice. That was the excitement of my first month out of the police academy. I was determined, however, to get more done than collecting beer bottles for my veteran training officers. Yes, Tom Q was the police model that I was definitely going to stay away from being. I would have been better off teaming up with Thomas so-and-so, Black, speaking of a mismatch. I'm protecting the name for those who may still be around. So I'm using fictitious names, just like they do in Hollywood. This is a movie. And if you want to, use actors, an example, they don't use their real names unless they're doing a documentary. So we're changing the names to protect those who are innocent. Got to go home at night to family. Nevertheless, I repeat, yes, Tom Q was a police model that I was definitely going to stay away from being. Like, I would have been better off teaming up with Thomas M. Speaking of M, he had already arrested about 15 people while we were out in the woods shooting whiskey bottles. See, I had to ride with training officers come out of the academy as a rookie. So while Thomas M. was out riding with a police officer who was doing a job, I was riding with one of the hillbillies going out shooting whiskey bottles at night in the woods. He said in the academy that he was going to arrest any and everybody who broke the laws, even if they spit on the sidewalk. And he did. Speaking of Thomas M. If there was a law for not wiping your nose after you sneezed, Tom would arrest you for that. It seemed that all of that tutoring that I'd done to him in the academy stayed in the academy, right behind the index card that was titled, I quote, "Waste of Time." Nevertheless, He did what he said he was going to do, and that he lived up to thus far. He lived up to it. I still had my doubts, though. Tom still had that itchy finger that he brought with him from Michigan. That was his home state. He still was very gung-ho, just waiting to get his first robbery in progress. On the other hand, I was still waiting to get my shot on driving and doing some real police work. You know, like saving a few lives and protecting a little bit of property from the burglars. I was even hoping that I might run into the burglar that stole my color television. That's back in like chapter 7 or so. Anyway, it was long before Officer Quinlan gave up the target practice, long enough to let me drive. I guess I must have been very boring to him by my first few nights at the control helms. I did everything that a rookie was supposed to do. I did everything according to the books, the same books that I found on the shelf under, quote, law enforcement, end quote. I wrote traffic tickets and answered calls before some of the units got to the scene. Though Opelika had his own desk dispatcher at the police station, we didn't have our own radio dispatcher. So we were on the same frequency as Metro Dade Police Department at the time. It was called Metro Dade Police Department. Oh, did I mention to you that my badge number was the first that was given to Opelika police officer? At that time, it was the first badge number given to me that they used. And that badge number, as coincidentally as it may seem, was number 27. I'm quoting. Anyway, our unit base headquarters identification number was, I quote, 1800, end quote. All other car patrol numbers followed with, I quote, 1801, 1802, 1803, etc., right up to the number of cars that were assigned to the uniformed patrol division. My favorite patrol unit number was, I quote, 1809, end quote, and it was. Off the record, it was my favorite unit code number, 1809. Going back now, unquote, as small as the city was, it also had the most unusual color police cars in the entire country. Blue and yellow. I mean, who ever heard of a blue and yellow police cars? They look more like yellow cabs than police cars. On top of all that, they were Fords, most of them. And by now, we all know how Black Sunshine and Officer so-and-so felt about Fords. That's spelled F-O-R-D-S, Fords. Now, since these Fords were police cars, I guess the F-O-R-D stood for finally our rookies drove, end quote. Even if they were Fords, that's why I chose Unit 1809. Why? Because it was a Chrysler Plymouth. And fast, too. And of course, we knew by now that Officer so-and-so loved fast cars. Needless to say, I finally had an opportunity, and my opportunity to prove to Officer Quinlan that I did know how to do something other than collect beer bottles for target practice. It was now the last of the month of July 1976. Just a few days remained to be exact. I had my share of driving and writing tickets. Then Officer Quinlan would take over and take us to the most likely to find trouble areas of the city. I repeat, I had my share of driving and writing tickets. Then Officer Quinlan would take over and take us to the most likely to find trouble areas of the city. I guess the worst place was down on Alibaba Avenue across 22nd Avenue. That place was almost as bad as, I quote, the whole, end quote, of Liberty City. You remember the hole, don't you? How can that place ever be forgotten? We did a lot of drug searches and arrests of the local drug pushermen. Most of the drugs were the light stuff, like marijuana, hash, and cocaine. It wasn't too often that we found some across that we come across heroin. I guess the last time I came across heroin was when I found Dion dead in her apartment. You remember that chapter? When I was in the city of Miami. I guess that was the last time I came across a heroin that really made me upset. If you wanted to catch the big stuff like heroin, you had to go a few more blocks north to Carol City, to the Carol City area. Yes, old Carol City. How can that place ever be forgotten? I often thought that I might even run into the offensive guard that tore my knee up in high school. Remember Carol City High School? That white guard tore my knee up, tore my ligament. The only problem was I didn't know how he looked. Besides, by now, he might have also been a cop. I do know he was white. Every once in a while, our desk dispatcher would come over the radio and give us a call. Sometimes the complaint citizens of Opelika wouldn't dial 911. They were called directly into our front desk at the station. Most of our desk dispatchers were highly trained citizens. They graduated from the local PTA board. That's PTA board. That's people thinking alike, end quote. They did. They all thought that they were the most important employees in the city. They even wore uniforms to bed. Well, let's just say that most of the time they were caught sleeping behind the desk, especially if it was quiet and late at night or early in the morning, whichever came first. Yes, sometimes we went into the station for something. They were behind the desk, sleep. I was tempted the first couple of times to pull my gun from my holster when I saw one dispatcher asleep. He had his mouth wide open. I got to read that again. This is hilarious. Off the record, I got to read this again. I think I remember what I'm about to say. I repeat, I was tempted the first couple of times to pull my gun from my holster when I saw one dispatcher asleep. He had his mouth wide open with his head tilted back. Like the dentist, open your mouth wide, open and close your eyes. Wide, tilted back. I thought he had been shot or something. Oh, by the way, that's why I wanted to pull my gun out my holster. I don't know what you were thinking. But when I saw him behind the desk sleep, off the record, I'm just telling you the truth now. When I saw him behind the desk sleep with mouth wide open, head to the back with no noise coming out of his mouth. I was going to pull my gun out my holster because I thought he was shot and somebody was in the station. They just shot him, but I saw no blood. Anyway, back to the record. He had his mouth wide open with his head tilted back. I thought he'd been shot or something. That is until I heard him snoring. Oh, it's right here. It is snoring. After that, I just snapped my safety lock back on my holster and handcuffed him to the chair. Now, that was one time he was snoring. There were other times when he wasn't snoring. I just off the record. Here I gave him credit for snoring. When he woke up, no one was around. Then he had crawled his way over to the radio and asked for a car to come by the station to check on a prisoner. He was too embarrassed to announce the name of the prisoner. He was an older white dude that reminded me of a, quote, red skeleton, end quote. Oh, how can I forget him? I felt so sorry for him after a while. He became my favorite prisoner to handcuff. Yes, I got a lot of practice from old Red. I still don't think that to this day he knew who it was that handcuffed him to his chair. Then there was another white dude named Blunt. Now, I don't know if you picked up what I was saying, but there were some times when he was asleep. It's off the record. There was some time we were asleep, and I did take out my handcuffs and handcuffed his hand to the chair, and then took off. He couldn't even feel it. He didn't even feel it. This is true. This is true. I write it. It's true testimony. This is true. This is a true story. It's autobiography. And that was Old Red. Then there was another white dude named Blunt. I wouldn't dare attempt to handcuff him to the chair. He probably would have ate his way free. Eat the handcuffs, that is, from around his wrists. He was every bit of 350 pounds and about 6 feet 3 inches in height. He was more favorable to a dish special than a dispatcher. A dish special than a dispatcher. He smoked a large cigar, or did he eat them? Anyway, that dude always had a cigar in his mouth and food in his stomach. I never caught him sleep, not even between meals. If I had her, I honestly don't believe I would have tried to handcuff old Blunt. Finally, last but not least, there was Mr. Jones. He was a cool soul brother that wanted to be his own manager as a movie star. Yet, cool was the only thing that he had going for himself. Well, he did have a more law knowledge than the other dispatchers. I guess it's because he went to the academy for a few weeks to become a reserve police officer. And he was a reserve police officer. He wasn't the most attractive black soul brother in the magazine. He was more favorable to be on the cover of the other house, opposed to the penthouse. Definitely not, quote, GQ, end quote. Somehow, though, Charles attracted a lot of women, all types and all colors and all races. I'm really trying to avoid using the word, quote, player, end quote. Still, it leaves me no choice. And that's putting it mildly. He played his way right into the life of a white boy. He played his way right into the life of a white broad, and she fell victim to holy matrimony. Yes, old Mr. Jones married Mrs. Jones, and together they made a little Love Jones. I guess Mrs. Jones' only problem would have been trying to avoid Billy Paul. Quote unquote. Now, for those who don't know the old school, Billy Paul, who is an African American singer, I don't know if he's still alive or not, but Billy Paul made a song of Me and Mrs. Jones. Mrs. Jones. Yeah, well, that's Charles and Mrs. Jones. Needless to say, as I was saying, every once in a while, the desk dispatcher would get on the radio and give us a call to go and handle. Oh, illustrious, beautiful, but small city of Opelika. Not really a world-famous tourist attraction, but it's still attracting enough attention to the criminals to come in and commit crimes every once in a while. That kept all 27 of us in uniform, busy enough to draw a paycheck every 2 weeks. Now you see why I had badge 27. I was the last of the 27 officers that were hired that came aboard on Opelika. In fact, before the three of us were at the academy, they only had 24 police officers on the whole department, small city. So at graduation, I believe Melendez was given 25, and the other guy was given 26, and I was given 27. Badge numbers. I was now making a regular salary and trying to save enough money to trade in the Ford. Oh, you thought I forgot about that, huh? No, not a chance. I was still very thoughtful my first month out of the academy and trading in the Ford Mustang. That comes from another chapter. I figured it was time that Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so moved up in the automobile industry and bought a real car. I seem to have developed a habit in moving to greater and better things, and that included cars. It was now August 1976, and my writing assignment was almost over. We were supposed to ride for only about a month to 6 weeks, but I was ready after 3 weeks to go into my own telephone booth and change. I was ready to answer any calls that I heard. Sweet Polly yell out. You got it? I repeat. I was ready to answer any calls I heard Sweet Polly yell out. Sweet Polly being the radio dispatcher, of course. And of course, that's the cartoon character of Underdog. If the old school, you would know that, what that means. So, Sweet Polly being the radio dispatcher, of course. My mustache was growing back in, and I was beginning to look more like a veteran instead of a rookie. All I had to do was iron my uniform a few more times with a hot iron, and I would fit in with the rest of the crew. Still, I was sharp. It was only obvious that my sharpness and neat physique followed me out of the police academy. I attracted a lot of attention when I stepped out of that police car, lifting weights every day and working out, improving my physique. The majority of the attention came from the females, of course.
Well, hello there, officer.
Officer so-and-so Officer Sunshine became very popular in town in a short time. So I guess I'm going to use Officer Sunshine. He was young. He was physically fit. He was attractive, and with the aid of a little mascara on his mustache, he was handsome. That's right. The mustache wasn't thick enough to go on his own, so Black Sunshine gave us some aid with some black mascara. He was Black Sunshine, full of shine and sparks. By now, Officer Sunshine had arrested a few criminals and felt like a police officer in the city. Just a few more days to go on training with his riding partner, and he would be out on his own. The calls continued to come from headquarters as well as Metro Dispatch, and everything in the city was abnormal and unexpected. In fact, everything in the city was also normal and expected. Being late summer, the city of Opelika was also hot. That left a lot of people trying to cool off whatever way they could have. Now, going back to dispatch, remember, I'm just off the record, remember that the police station had its own dispatchers that were notified that the citizen would call into the station and call for help. And back in those days, there wasn't that much 911. So they would call Opelika Police Department and say, help, send the police, my husband beating the hell out of me. Or somebody just stole my car, or etc. And then sometimes they would call in Miami-Dade because they thought it was the county, but when they found the city, then Metro Dispatcher would call us directly, or actually would call the headquarters 18, the dispatcher, and say, you got a call in your city. And then he would assign a police car to whoever he wanted to assign it to. So, again, the calls abnormal was expected as expected, and the calls normal was unexpected. So being late summer, the city of Opelika was also hot. That left a lot of people trying to cool off whatever way that they could have. Even if that meant committing crimes to get a free night in the Gray Bar Hotel, end quote. That's the Gray Bar Hotel. Our jail was right in the station. It was painted with gray bars. So we called it the Gray Bar Hotel. Besides, it was much cooler in the jails than the streets. Every once in a while, one of our dispatchers would come on the air and give us a call. The most popular was the nightly domestic fights between husband and wife. Didn't I tell you? Or the drunks fighting over whiskey that was left in the corner of the bottle. And of course, my favorites were robberies in progress or bolos that would go out over the air from the county area. Now, bolos, B-O-L-O-S, in plural, means be on the lookout. that the county would put on the radio for everyone to look for a car that was involved in a crime. That's when I was sitting in the passenger seat while Officer Q drove and looked for wanted crooks and cars. It was nothing like the days when riding in the city of Miami with PSA Ports or PSA Fortune. Unlike those two, Quinlan was not into catching wanted criminals. He was more into catching his own criminals. Then there would be the emergency calls that would come across the air from either dispatcher. That's when we all went with the blue lights flashing on the roof of the cars and sirens blasting in the dark. Every so often, Metro Police would need to back up. They would need a backup on some calls outside of our city limits. If it was an emergency, we went. That was exciting. It was a chance to go at least 2 miles before arriving to the scene of a call for a change. You see, in other words, if you don't catch it, Opelika was a very small city. We get a call to go to an address, we would be right around the corner. So we're like wasting a lot of gas. So when we got a call with the county to back up, they gave us a chance to go at least 2 miles with the license siren. Like I told you before, Opelika was a very small city. By the time you turned on your emergency equipment, it was time to turn them off. I'm serious. I'm reading. I'm quoting. Had it not been for Burger King, we would have had to bring our own Whoppers from home, or have them mailed in from Carroll City. That was the nearest town. I can remember this particular summer night in August. It was relatively slow that night. Officer Quinlan and I had just completed a traffic stop, and I'd written a few tickets to a guy who didn't believe that his car was going faster than ours. He was in a Chevy Corvette. And I don't know. Well, anyway, he passed us. He must have been doing about at least 70. And it must have been about 10 o'clock p.m. And we were thinking about going over to the avenue where the drunks were to check on some empty wine bottles. Halfway to our destination, the desk dispatcher comes on the air. Quote, 1800 emergency. End quote. Metro dispatcher. 1800. Dispatcher. 1800. Advise 1809 that I just received a call on the phone reference a shooting. Is at the Wynwood West Apartments, 13350 Northwest 30th Avenue. The complaint was a neighbor. Metro dispatch.
1-800 emergency, advise 809, shooting at Wynwood West Apartments, 13350 Northwest 30th Avenue.
1809. Officer Sunshine grabs the mic. 1809, that's QSL. At that time, Officer Sunshine was driving that night. I immediately hit the switches that turned on the blue lights and siren. It didn't take us long at all to get to the apartment complex. We were just a few blocks away from the police station when the call went out. It was about a mile worth of travel time altogether. When we pulled into the parking area, we were met by several people who were pointing towards the direction of a downstairs apartment. I knew then that call wasn't going to be a prank call. I slammed my brakes on about halfway in the parking lot and turned off the siren. The blue lights were still flashing, left flashing, right flashing, a 2-light bar overhead, blue lights on the roof. And that was to attract the attention of everyone else who was coming, as well as the oncoming spectators. Then someone yelled to us, and I quote, "He's in the room. He's in the room on the floor," end quote. At first, I didn't know who they referred to as he. I thought it was a grown man. Officer Quinlan and myself both approached the apartment door of the apartment with caution in mind We both pulled out our service revolvers from our holsters. I had my .357 Magnum, and Quinlan was carrying a semi-automatic 9mm Colt. When some of the neighbors saw our revolvers in our hands, they ran as though to take over in case a shootout. They ran as if to take cover. They ran as though to take cover in case of a shootout. In other words, they thought we were going to have a shootout with whoever was in there, in the apartment. When they did that, it left me with the impression that we probably was going to have to shoot someone. You know, it made me think that they knew something that we didn't know at the time. Like perhaps the gunman was still in the apartment. And that is when Quinlan and I signaled to one another to go in with extreme caution. Quinlan went into the door first. I followed with my Magnum's barrel pointing towards the floor. I figured I better not point it up. I thought since we were in an apartment complex on the ground floor, I better point in the direction where the bullet wouldn't hit anyone in case my gun went off, to the upstairs. So slowly we continued in the living room on the apartment. We continued to the living room in the apartment. Quinlan went in the kitchen area as I went into the bedrooms, as the first rooms that we entered. I checked the smaller bedroom of the two bedrooms apartment and didn't see anyone. With my gun now pointing straight ahead, I continued towards the direction of a larger bedroom and went to the door. In other words, this was a 3-bedroom apartment. I was really anticipating for the worst. So I was ready to fire my Magnum at this gunman if he was to point a gun at me. Besides, I promised my wife that I'd come home every night as her husband in uniform, alive, in all caps. It was in the master bedroom when I saw a small boy sitting on the floor in front of an open door. He looked to be about 6 years old or young, and the oldest. That's when I yelled, quote, "Hey, Tom, in here," end quote. As I waited on Quinlan with my gun now pointing to the floor, the small boy looked up at me, then back towards the open door. The door seemed to be that of a clothes closet. The small boy's attention was highly focused towards the direction of the open closet as though he was watching a television program in the closet. Only this program must have been a sad one. There were tears coming from his eyes. As sirens could have been heard in the background coming towards our direction, I spoke to the small boy. I quote, "What you doing here? Are you okay?" End quote. The small boy looked up at me, then pointed towards the open door with his right finger. At the time, Quinlan came to the door with his gun still drawn. "What is it, sunshine? What is it, sunshine?" he asked. I walked toward the direction of the open door where the small boy was sitting. At that point, the door had my view blocked to see directly inside the closet. As I went around the door and looked in the closet, I saw a smaller boy lying on top of a stack of dirty clothes. I quote, "Oh my God," end quote. I yelled to Quinlan, "What's wrong, sunshine?" I holstered my gun, I holstered my Magnum, and rushed in the closet to check on this toddler. He looked to be about 2 to 3 years old. When I knelt down on the dirty clothes to feel him, I noticed him twitching as though his nerves were bothered. His body was twitching. I then reached out to him and felt his body. He was still twitching, but I didn't see any injuries. And that's because I couldn't see his head. His face was turned away from me, so I put my hand under his head in an attempt to see if he would respond to me. I feared the worst when I saw him for the first time lying there. Still, I didn't expect this. When I put my hand under his head and moved it, I felt liquid running across my fingers. When I moved my hand from under his head, I also moved a part of his brain in my hands that fell in my fingers. Needless to say, my hand was soaked in blood. That was the second time since I found that burnt 3-year-old little girl in Miami, burned to beyond recognition, that I wanted to cry in uniform. And I quote in big caps, "Oh no, Tom, he's been shot. He's been shot. The bullet hit him in the head. Call for the paramedics. Get an ETA." End quote. "No, sunshine, forget the paramedics. Grab him." That's quote unquote. I picked up the small toddler as though he was my son. As though he was my son that I did not have yet. I held him in my arms gently in my arms against my badge. I repeat. I then held him gently in my arms against my badge and my nameplate across the right chest of my navy blue uniform. I immediately trotted behind Tom, who had already made it to our patrol car. I was sitting in the car behind the steering wheel, ready to take off with the toddler still twitching in my arms. Actually, that was Tom, sitting behind the steering wheel, ready to take off as I had the small toddler still twitching in my arms. I yelled to no one. I yelled to one of the spectators as I ran from the apartment door with the small toddler in my arms against my uniform chest. I quote, "Open the back door of this police car for me," end quote. As the onlooker saw me with the toddler in my arms, some yelled out, "Oh, Jesus, Lord, don't tell me that little baby got shot." It's quote unquote. As I got to the door of the police car, I bade everybody to stay back as I sat in the back seat. Then I slammed the door. "Let's go, Tom, floor it." Other units that had arrived on the scene moments after we came out the apartment stopped the traffic as we pulled out of the parking lot with our lights and sirens in the distance. More were coming. In the distance, we heard sirens as though the paramedics were not even close to arriving at the house, at the scene, the apartment. The professional part of me had left. I repeat, The professional part of me had left. It was now the parent part of me that had taken over. My compassion for this toddler controlled my strength. It immediately turned me into weakness. The love that I have for children made me forget that I was a cop, sitting in the back seat of a police car. I can't ever remember being a passenger in a car that was moving so fast before in my life. And I mean, Tom floored it just like I yelled to him to do so. I kept staring down at the child, trying to see if his eyes were open in the dim lighting of the police car. It was dark, and only the passing streetlights gave me enough light to see his pink brains protruding from his small skull. I again yelled to Tom, quote, "Move this fucking car, Tom," end quote. With the toddler's body continued to twitch in my arms, I was hoping and praying to God that his movements were a sign of life and not death. Still, I had seen death before, and deep down inside, where my tears were, I knew that this child lay dead in my arms. "He ain't gonna make it, Tom," I quoted. I said, "He ain't gonna make it." I yelled from the backseat over the noise of the siren. "Hang in there, kid," Officer Quinlan said as he looked up in the rear mirror and saw my face, troubled with tears. Quote, "Oh, dear Lord, please don't let this boy die," end quote. I kept saying over and over and over again to Tom. And Tom gets on the radio, 1809, dispatch, 1809, Tom. "Have someone in the complaint room call Parkway General Hospital emergency and advise them that we would be there in about 2 to 3 minutes with a toddler that got a gunshot wound to the head. Advise him to have a staff ready and waiting with a stretcher by the emergency door. QSL, dispatch, QSL 1809. Moments later, that's exactly how long it took. We arrived at the emergency room entrance, and a small group of doctors and nurses were waiting for us as we arrived. Tom came around and opened the door of the police car for me as the hospital staff grabbed the toddler out of my arms. My blood-soaked uniform was the only thing that I had to remind me that I was still on the job as a cop. I walked in the emergency room area to watch the doctors and nurses work on the kid. After about 10 minutes of working on the child, I peeped through a small opening of the curtain. That is when I saw a doctor pull a white sheet over the head of the toddler. And I saw the blood seep through the white sheet. I knew that the little three-year-old child was dead. Never had a chance in life. Not to even mention the .357 Magnum that took it. Yes, that's right. He was shot with .357 Magnum, the same caliber weapon that I was carrying in my holster. Moments after that, I saw a young black couple running through the doors of the hospital towards the direction of the child. I knew they were his parents. How's that? Because they both looked stupid and irresponsible. I heard the mother yell and scream as I walked out of the emergency room and into the parking lot of the hospital, emergency parking lot. I figured at that time it was the best thing for me to do. I was so upset. I probably would have handcuffed both of them to the bed of their dead son, give them my magnum, and yell, "Join him, goddammit!" Nevertheless, I walked out into the parking lot instead. I looked up towards heaven and then down at my bloody uniform and thought, I quote, "Is this what police work is all about?" End quote. Is this what police work is all about? Quote unquote. Then I walked to the side of the building away from everybody and wiped my eyes before my tears observed by my partner. That's all he needed to take back to the station, a rookie cop crying in uniform. But at that point, I didn't give a damn who saw me cry or whatever they may have thought about me. And that's because I was a man with a heart before I was a cop. And no matter what you face in life, your feelings will always dominate pride. But that's all I can say. That's all I can